bearing. Let's throw some perspective onto this story. And joining me tonight is constitutional lawyer Ivan Bowe. Ivan, many thanks for joining us this evening. My question is, Interpol does not enforce arrest warrants for offences relating to behavior or cultural, differences or disputes and things like that. Does this case fall in that form? And also, where does Interpol begin? Where does it end?
Thank you so much, Canary, for having me here. One, I would clearly state that reading the proceedings in the Chief Magistrate's Court, there is a clear indication that people who were involved in asking for an international arrest warrant, and indeed the person, His Worship, who ordered that arrest warrant be served on Interpol, are oblivion of, one, the workings of Interpol and the workings of cross-border law enforcement. And Interpol is not an arresting authority. That's one. And therefore, the Interpol, in its form, with that order, it cannot arrest our president, Isaac Ssemakadde. Two, when an arrest warrant is made, it is made within the jurisdiction of Uganda. And particularly for the Chief Magistrate's Court, that court does not have that power of making an international arrest warrant.
Is that written anywhere in the laws of Uganda that the Chief Magistrate does not have jurisdiction? Over that?
You know, jurisdiction is a creature of statute, and the Chief Magistrates Act does not provide for those kinds of powers. But what they can do is that they can have an arrest warrant, and that arrest warrant can be executed by the Ugandan police. So, for example, if Isaac Ssemakadde was, let's say, in Moroto, banging the table, he can be arrested by police in execution of that arrest warrant. And the idea of international warrants is abused in the way it is stated. One, the person who asked for it abused it. Even the decision itself, trying to give it some little bit of credibility and credence, is also misguided. So Interpol does not work on the whims of the Chief Magistrate's Court.
Are arrest warrants issued for people who are already convicted, like Isaac is?
No, arrest warrant...
Or they work for people who need to be returned for court processes, including investigations?
Arrest warrants are mainly for fugitives. But mainly in serious cases. And therefore, what happens is that the member country, a member of Interpol, requests Interpol to press what we call the red notice. So Interpol reviews to make sure that that request satisfies the standard that it is not political persecution, and two, that human rights concerns are addressed.
Okay.
And when that is done and they approve, then they issue the red notice. But even when they issue the red notice and the duty to arrest or the powers to arrest depend on the country individually. For example, if there is a red notice on, let's say, Jamil Mukulu, it will be Tanzania to decide whether to arrest or not. But even then, a person can challenge that red notice, and then after arresting, then there has to be a formal request, extradition formal request to let's say Tanzania, and a person still arrested can challenge that extradition. So we have a long way to go.
Okay.
And by saying so, I think whereas it is good for the ears of those that might want it, the Tumukunde and Biamazima, I think the request was misguided.
Okay,
It would have
Ivan,
been stopped at issuing the arrest warrant to Ugandan police and not to Interpol.
We'll in a bit ask you on how this is likely going to end, but we're now joined by Prof. Chris Lubogo, who is a law donor at Nkumba University. Prof, I want to put this to you. According to the Chief Magistrate, he actually said and clarified that there is no such a thing as international arrest warrant. However, courts in Uganda have been issuing it, by practice. My question is, what happens to those who have been issued international arrest warrants? Does that mean it's all in vain?
Well, I hope I got your question right, because we're having rain challenges where I am, but predominantly, I think you're asking in light of perhaps a difference between an international arrest warrant vis-a-vis an arrest warrant. But the judicial officer was very explicit. He made a distinction and said, whereas the law does not provide for international arrest warrant, he actually made provision, or he, used the argument of using an arrest warrant, and then invoked Interpol to be able to exercise their mandate on the basis of a red flag. But you see, one thing you must understand every time you're dealing with Interpol issues, first of all, let us argue this in terms of the tenability under Ugandan law. The Director of Public Prosecution, the judiciary under the Extradition Act, the Interpol Vice NCB can issue international arrest warrants. However, such warrants require extraditable offenses under the Extradition Act, dual criminality in the sense that crime in both Uganda and the requested country, absence of political motives as provided for under Section 7 of the Extradition Act, and then the argument fleeing Uganda. If the individual or the subject or the person of interest in this case is keeping house, like to use the illegal phrase, or jump ship, then you may issue substantially an arrest warrant because now you are invoking. Now, for purposes of the red flag or the red notice, it is intended to locate and arrest, if possible, that individual. But see, there are substantive qualifications also for Interpol to invoke that particular issue. Number one, Interpol's Article 3 prohibits politically motivated warrants. Extradition refusals can be granted even on the basis of human rights or political grounds. Even the International Court, the ICC and ACHPR require grave crimes such as genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity to justify an action. So the practical aspects here becomes that there are substantial judicial bars.
Okay, Prof. So if I may come in here, Prof, I want to ask, one, can it be proven that this is a case of political nature? Number two, can it be proven that it falls under cases that can be extraditable?
Good question. And perhaps that's the question that we need to ask ourselves. You need to prove if perhaps a contempt of court is a question of what? National interest, or perhaps substantial interest to the extent that I have to invoke, an extradition, or perhaps even engage the likelihood of Interpol. For me, I would argue that this is what they call jurisdistopodia, meaning, jurist from the word philosopher of the law, dystopia, people who are, have bad feelings within them, and they are simply witch hunting this individual. They are using everything necessary possible to make sure they incarcerate, destroy, reduce, or even completely stop the working of this individual.
All right, thanks, Prof. Ivan, when you look at this particular offense of, insulting the modesty of a woman that Isaac Ssemakadde is actually accused of, do you think that the case is most likely going to die a natural death? But what happens to the ULS president? He hasn't even completed half of his term.
Well, I must say that because of his work methods, our ULS president, he has also had very many enemies in very many quarters, perhaps very powerful, asking him to apologize and all that, and him refusing and all that. So, as Prof said, people are trying to make sure they corner him in one way or the other. But going straight to the question, that case is very small, and it is too petty, but also there are other contestation to that offense. I am aware that colleagues are trying to challenge it in the Constitutional Court, but also even in this very criminal case in which that warrant was issued, there is a revision application number 2 of 2025 before the High Court. There is another application for stay of proceedings of where that arrest warrant has been issued, still before the High Court. That's miscellaneous application number 30 of 2025. And in my honest view and opinion is that the idea of pushing through these arrest warrants and everything is not about the rule of law, but rather a deficit of common sense.
Analysis right there from Ivan Bowe, constitutional lawyer, and thank you very much, Prof. Chris Olubogo from Ukumba University, for weighing in on this matter. Now.